You know that feeling when you realize managing people is the hardest part of your job? Yeah, you are not alone. Today, we're diving into a classic guide for managers, Skills with People, to really unpack the core ideas from its author, Professor Michael Argyle. We're going to find out how to become more socially effective and, hopefully, turn those tricky human relations into your biggest strength. Let's get right into it. So right off the bat, Professor Argyle just completely challenges a common myth. We tend to think of people skills as, something you're either born with or you're not. But he says, nope, that's the exact opposite of the truth. He sees it as a professional skill, just as complex and specific as learning to write code or design a building. It's a skill that requires real, dedicated training, especially for managers, because every single one of their interactions creates a ripple effect across the whole team. All right, so here's our game plan for today. We're going to start with the absolute foundations of any human interaction. Then we'll get into the real nitty-gritty of communication, learn how to master those crucial one-on-ones, and then look at leading effective groups. We'll even explore how the physical environment itself shapes our behavior. And we'll wrap up with maybe the most important part, how you can actually learn and master these skills for yourself. Okay, let's lay the groundwork. What even is a social skill, really? It sounds so simple. But Professor Argyle gives us this powerful and, honestly, surprisingly straightforward model that just changes how you think about every single conversation you have.
Okay, this right here, this is the core idea of the entire book, and it's a total game changer. Just think about driving a car. You have a goal, right? Get to your destination. You're constantly perceiving what's around you, road signs, other cars. You take action, you steer, you brake. You get instant feedback, your speed, your lane position, and you're making constant tiny corrections. Well, Argyle says leading a meeting is exactly the same thing. A skilled manager is constantly reading the road, the body language, the tone of voice, the subtle shifts in the room, and they're adjusting their approach in real time. It's not magic, it's a continuous active feedback loop.
But that brings up a really good question. If it's a skill, just like driving, does the road always look the same? And the book's answer to that is a hard no. The context, the situation you find yourself in, completely changes the rules of the game.
And this slide just nails that difference. The way we interact at work is governed by a completely different set of unwritten rules than, say, how we act at home with family. At the office, we're generally more formal, we're focused on the task at hand, and we tend to keep our emotions in check. A socially skilled person gets this intuitively. They know how to code switch. They understand how to navigate the very different rule books of a casual chat by the coffee machine versus a high-stakes job interview.
So this idea of reading the road leads us straight into our next big topic, the art of communication. Because before we can act skillfully, we have to perceive the world around us accurately. But do we really see what's actually there? Here's a fascinating and maybe slightly unsettling truth. Our perception is not a perfect video camera. We are constantly filtering, selecting, and even distorting what we see and hear. The book gives a perfect example. A manager goes to a dinner at his golf club. Now think about the story he tells the next day. The version he tells his wife is going to be different from the one he tells his secretary, which is going to be different again from the one he shares with his colleagues. He's not lying, he's just unconsciously selecting different details and changing the emphasis for each specific audience. And this bias we have toward what we already believe, it is incredibly strong. This study in the book is amazing. It found that new car owners would actively look for ads for the car they just bought. Why would they do that? Well, it's a classic case of confirmation bias. We are all wired to seek out information that confirms our decisions. It helps us avoid that uncomfortable feeling that we might have been wrong. We just prefer familiar, reassuring information. So if we're all walking around with these built-in filters and biases, how in the world can a manager communicate effectively? Well, the answer is structure. Professor Argyle lays out this simple but incredibly effective four-step formula for any talk or report. First, you've got to motivate your audience. Give them a reason to care. Then, give them the roadmap, the outline. After that, you dive into the details with clear examples. And finally, you bring it all home by repeating the main takeaway. A structure like this just cuts through the mental noise and makes your message stick. Okay, so let's take these big ideas about perception and structure and apply them to one of the most critical, and let's be honest, often most dreaded managerial tasks out there, the one-on-one interview.
The book breaks down interviews into these three main types, and the key insight here is that your goal completely changes the skills you need. See, in a selection interview, you're basically an investigator. You're digging for facts. In an appraisal, you're a coach, focused on improvement. And in a counseling situation, you're a helper. You're there to listen. A truly skilled manager knows exactly which hat to wear and which tools to use for each situation.
And one of the most powerful tools in that toolkit is the type of question you ask. A closed question, like, how long were you there? That's for checking facts. It keeps you in control of the conversation. But an open-ended question, like, so what's your general impression of how things went in that role? That hands control over to the other person and invites these rich, detailed answers. Mastering which question to ask and when is just a fundamental skill for any manager. And when it comes to performance appraisals, the book really champions this powerful technique, target setting. The magic here is how it completely reframes the entire conversation. Instead of this subjective criticism, which, let's face it, always puts people on the defensive, it becomes a collaborative process. You're focused on objective, mutually agreed upon goals. The whole conversation shifts from, here's what you did wrong, to, okay, how can we win together? All right, now we're going to zoom out from the one-on-one to the even more complex world of group dynamics. How do we take a whole room full of people for a meeting or a committee and actually make it productive? Well, first we have to understand that effective teams don't just happen. They evolve. They go through these predictable stages, famously outlined by Bruce Tuckman. They form, then they often storm as conflicts and power dynamics start to bubble up. If they can get through that, they norm by figuring out ways to work together, and only then can they truly perform at a high level. A manager's job isn't to prevent the storming, but to guide the team right through it.
We have all been in meetings that feel like a complete waste of time. But why does that happen? Professor Argyle points to something he calls the hidden agenda. While everyone is officially on the record discussing the quarterly budget, there are all these undercurrents of personal rivalries, power plays, and unspoken frustrations that can completely sink the ship if the leader doesn't see them and navigate them carefully.
And of course, the leader style is a huge factor. The classic authoritarian, my way or the highway approach might get a task done quickly, but it often just kills morale and job satisfaction. On the other hand, the research is crystal clear. A more democratic, participative style where people feel heard leads to higher satisfaction, lower turnover, and often much better and more creative decisions because you're tapping into the brainpower of the entire team. Okay, let's zoom out one last time. Because people don't work in a vacuum, right? They work within a system, a structure. So how does the actual design of the work itself impact all of these social interactions we've been talking about? This brings us to this really powerful concept of a socio-technical system. Now, it sounds like a fancy term, but it's a simple idea. You cannot separate the people from the process. The social system, how people communicate and collaborate, is completely tangled up with the technical system, the tools they use, the workflow, the physical layout of the office. A great manager knows you have to design both of those systems to work in harmony, not against each other. And this is the perfect cautionary tale for what happens when you ignore the social side of that equation. In the Durham coal mines, this new, technologically superior cutting machine was introduced. On paper, it should have been a massive success, but it was a total failure. Why? Because the new machine completely broke up the small, tight-knit, autonomous work teams that were the heart of the miner's social system. The technical improvement shattered the social fabric, and productivity just plummeted. And this brings us full circle to our final and maybe the most important question of all. If social skill is this complex and this vital, how do we actually get better at it? The book is very, very firm on this point. You don't learn social skills by sitting through a lecture. You learn by doing. Effective training is an active cycle. You need to see a clear model of what good looks like, then you have to practice it yourself in a safe setting like a role play, get immediate, specific feedback, and then talk about what happened. It's this constant loop of practice, reflection, and then trying again. So as we wrap things up, we want to leave you with this really powerful question, inspired by Professor Argyle's work. Instead of feeling overwhelmed and trying to fix everything all at once, just think about this. What is the one single conversation, meeting, or relationship in your work life where improving your skill would have the biggest positive impact? Start there. Thanks so much for joining us for this explainer.